Welcome to Hebrew Decoding with your teacher, Reb Yochanan. I made this video to teach people how to read the letters of the Hebrew Alef-Bet. So I have the following here. Maybe you already know them, so see if you can give them a shot. Pause the video if you need to, and unpause when you're ready. But otherwise, you can just skip ahead, and I will pronounce the letters for you. The Alef-Bet has this thing called a Gematria, where each letter has a numerical value. So if you see a letter by itself, it could be used to represent the number verse of a particular passage as follows. So Aleph has a value of 1, Bet 2, Gimel 3, Dalet 4, He 5, Vav 6, Zayin 7, Chet 8, Tet 9, Yod 10, Kaf 20, Lamed 30, Men 40, Nun 50, Samech 60, ayin 70, He 80, Savi 90, Kof 100, Resh 200, Shin 300, and Tav 400. So sometimes if there is a particular number, for example 21, you will need a Kaf and an Aleph to show 20 plus 1 equals 21. If you need to practice, pause the screen and just see how well you do, and then take the next screen to practice it. So we have the Alef-Bet, but it's in a scrambled order. So you don't necessarily have the memory of saying the Alef-Bet in order to help you. So take a look at these letters, pause if you need to, and see how you pronounce them. So now that you've unpaused, let's see how you did. Did you have Chet, Vav, Zayin, Dalet, Bet, Aleph, Gimel, He, Kaf, Yod, Tet, Kof, Sadi, Ayin, Pe, Lamed, Samech, Resh, Nun, Shin, Mem, and Tav? Well, if you did a great job. But if you didn't do so well, that's okay. Now there are some Sofit or final forms. That means that certain letters have a different form at the end of a word, a different shape. And those 5 letters are Kaf, Mem, Nun, Pe, and Sadi. So when you see it at the end of a word, it would be, for example, Kaf Sofit, which is really Chaf Sofit because of the pronunciation, or Pe Sofit, which is really Fe Sofit because it's never really pronounced as a P at the end of the word. But other than that, the letters don't change their pronunciation. You'll notice in most cases there's a tail that is formed, as if some part just kind of dropped down. And that's a good way of remembering it. At the end of a word, you'll usually see a tail. It stretches below the bottom line of the sentence. And now we have the Dagesh. It's a dot, and that's used to mark pronunciation, and sometimes it doesn't exactly, and it's used with consonants. The Dagesh takes what would be a fricative and turns it into a stop. The fricative is a consonant in which the airflow continues, and the examples are th as in thin, v as in then, th, s, sh, z, and zh. Not all of those sounds appear in Hebrew, and the stop, the consonant in which the airflow naturally stops. So examples are p, t, k, b, d, g. First 3 are unvoiced because you don't use your vocal cord, p, t, k. But the last 3, b, d, g, you're using your vocal cord, so they are voiced. And you will see those sounds in Hebrew, and there are only 4 Hebrew letters that really make a different sound with this dot. And those are Bet, Kaf, He, and in some cases, Tav. Bet will be with the Dagesh of the sound. If it does not have the Dagesh, it is a the sound. Kaf with the dot is k, and without is ch. Pe with the dot is p, and without the dot is f. In some cases, for example, the Ashkenazi pronunciation of Tav without a Dagesh is s, as in Shabbos. But in other dialects, it's usually pronounced as t, as in Shabbat. Scholars theorize that the pronunciation of the Tav, at the example of Bereshit, would have been pronounced Bereshith in biblical Hebrew. But in modern day, it's really not used. And then you have Sin, which is on the left, and Shin on the right. They're not technically Dageshes because they don't change a fricative into a stop. S and sh in Sin and Shin are both fricatives. Now you have the Nikkud or the Vowel Marks, and these are for people who, if you see just plain consonants in a Hebrew sentence, it will be hard to read if you don't know how to pronounce the words at sight. Now, there's a quote by Aaron Raskin, who wrote Letters of Light, which is just an illustrative book about the Hebrew letters and their spiritual meaning, and it's very deep and insightful. And he said, if the letter is the body, then the vowel is its soul. Body without a soul cannot survive. So think of it this way. Are very physical sounds. They have a body to them. But then, the vowel, much more breathy. And remember in the beginning of Genesis, when God breathed into Adam and made him a living soul. Without the breath, there is no soul. So again, a body without a soul cannot survive. And one can thus begin to appreciate both the spiritual energy transmitted via the Nikkudos and what they represent. And he adds about the Nikkud Gematria. One dot in a vowel marking, like yod, the shape of a yod is a bit like a dot. It looks more like an apostrophe to me, but if you remember, yod has a value of 10. And one line, which is like a horizontal vav, equals 6. So for this example here, we have an aleph with the comets vowel, and this looks like a line and a dot. And one dot is 10, and one line is 6, for a total value of 16. I don't really know what this means, but it's the theory behind it at least. And now we'll get into the different types of vowels and how they're pronounced. So the Nikkud vowel marks, there's 5 types. We have the A type, the E type, the I type, the O type, and the U type. This is more or less pronounced A, E, O, U. If you have studied Spanish and Italian, it's not all that unfamiliar. Let me put these in just so you have an understanding of how to remember these. The dashes will usually be an A vowel type. So you'll see the dashes or the lines, and they'll usually be an A sound. So a long A type would be A, the short would be A, very short would be A. And you'll notice for the very short vowels, they will all have what appears to be a colon, which I'll explain in a moment. We also have implied as an A type vowel, the ayin and the yod will have this short A sound. And then we have the hey, which at the end of a word will imply a vowel, as in Torah. So Torah has a hey at the end, and the last vowel sound is an A. Then we have what I like to call eye dots, or I suppose they kind of look like coconut dots, if you will. I like to say as an egg, because some people pronounce it egg, which we read the pronunciation of the 2 dots, A. And then you have and then you have eh. Then you have the low dot, and it's pronounced E as in ski. So if you see an aleph with a dot or a yod with a dot, it's going to be pronounced E. And if you see an aleph and a yod and there's just a dot there, it's going to be pronounced E as well, but it's going to be shorter. Then we have the high dot here, but not for the short and very short. They will look more like the long A vowel type. I'll explain that in a moment. So again, we have a vav with a high dot and an aleph with a high dot. There's all pronounced O. Now in Ashkenazi pronunciation, you'll see this. And this will be pronounced Moshiach instead of Mashiach in other dialects of Hebrew. And then we have the short version, which would be O. And then we have a mid dot with a vav, and that's pronounced U. We also have this aleph here with 3 dots below it. I like to think it as descending into do, just to remember that it has an U vowel sound. And now, let me explain why we use these colons. These colons are the shape of the shva, again, colon dots, which either sounds like or silent, and they're always unstressed. The word shva means empty vowel, and it's very, very short. So that's why we use it with these. So, b, le, ye, bereshit, in the beginning, lemayim, to the water. They can change in pronunciation depending on their placement in the word and the context, and then you'll see no mark. This can mean a letter is silent, for example, the aleph or the ayin, and then Otherwise, it signals a plain consonant. So, for example, the word Shabbat has a tav at the end, and the tav does not have a vowel marking. Well, that's natural because it's not Shabbata or Shabbati or Shabbatu. The last sound is a consonant. Now let's get into the next part. We have Aleph as a first letter is more likely to imply an A-type or E-type vowel. So an A or an S sound is the first letter. If you're not using Nikkud, the next is ayin as a first letter is more likely to imply A-type or O-type vowels. So A or O, Aleph and ayin as first letters, which never use a shva. Otherwise, ayin is more likely to use a shva than Aleph if it is not the first letter in the word. We have vav, and as a first letter, it usually sounds like the, but it can sound like oo some of the time. In the middle of a word, it's a bit 50-50. It can sound like o or oo. A double vav usually sounds like boo. So if you see two vavs in a row, it will sound like boo. And as a final letter, vav can sound like oo some of the time, or o, but it can sound like the. But this is usually when it follows yod. So if you see a yod directly to the right of vav at the end of a word, it's going to be pronounced like a the. But if you don't see that yod, it's going to be pronounced like oo or o. Then we have yod as a first letter. Always has a consonantal y sound. Even though the Hebrew word for Israel is pronounced Yisrael, always has that consonantal y sound in the beginning. But as a final letter, yod typically takes on an E sound. And then we have the short U-type vowel that we see with the three dots going down, doom, like I say. It's very rare. Now, the prevalence of letter sounds by position and word can really help if you're lacking Nikkud. So we'll start with the first letters. Usually, the first letter will take on the stop pronunciation as opposed to the fricative pronunciation. So, bet, kaf, pei, tav will take on the stop pronunciation. Very rarely will take on the fricative pronunciation. It's 86% stop, 14% fricative for almost all of these except kaf and chaf, which is 93.7. There are dageshes used in Torah for gimel and dalet. There are some scholars that say that gimel without the dagesh would be pronounced differently. But in modern use, it's not really relevant. It just makes a hard g sound. And again, shin more likely than sin. Now as a final letter, it's quite the opposite. The fricative pronunciation will be used instead of the stop pronunciation. So v will be used instead of b. Ch will be used instead of k. F will be used instead of p. Chaf Sofit, 80% of the time will be ch, 20% of the time will be ch. You will often see a vowel marking to show that it is ch, which is to mark that it is a second person possessive, as in Elohecha, which means your God. Now for the medial letter, it's a bit more split in terms of the frequency of fricative pronunciation and stop pronunciation. So that occurs virtually all the time. Very notable exception is Shabbat. Chaf occurs 2 times as much as the chaf pronunciation. When in doubt, aim for the fricative ch as opposed to the k sound. Then fe occurs 3 times as much as the pei pronunciation. So when in doubt, guess the fricative if it's in the medial letter. Now for other tips, as a verbal prefix, shin means that or which and can transform a verb into a noun. Asa, perform, becomes she asa, performer, or that which performs. So Harry Houdini, that performs. It is implied that he is the performer. This is more for grammatical understanding. So if you see that, it will be pronounced she. Then we have the letter he as a first letter. Very often indicates ha, which means the. And then as a last letter, it typically indicates the vowel. So for example, Torah ends with the letter he, but the last thing you hear is the a, not h. And like he, chet as a first letter takes on an A-type vowel the majority of the time. And then we have lamed as a first letter, often indicates le, which means two. Now, decoding letter pairs can be very useful for helping you understand how to pronounce letters when you don't have the Nikkud. So, a vav and a bet, a vav and a pei, a vav and a mem, and a vav and a yud are going to be pronounced uv, uf, and vi almost, if not all, the time. These are a bit more split, but it's more common to have the v, so the le, the se, the sh, more likely than u, us, and ush. Then we have he and yod. This is a ha, and this makes an e sound, so hi, ayidon. 98% of the time, that will be the case. Then you have the yod and the vav and the yod and the ayin. You will get yo as in Yosef or Joseph 100% of the time. This would be ya 95% of the time as in Yaakov, which in English we would say Jacob. And then we have Aleph and ayin, and that makes a E-type vowel a 100% of the time. Then we have Aleph and yod, and those will be pronounced E and A. Then we have Aleph and Vav, and those will be pronounced O most of the time, but they can be pronounced Ov and U. But when in doubt, pronounce it O. And then we have Ayin and Vav. Most of the time it's pronounced O, but it can be pronounced Avo in some cases. And then we have Ayin and Yod, and that's pronounced A most of the time, but it can be pronounced E most of the time. But when in doubt, pronounce it A. Some other tips: yod and mem, it is a suffix marking the masculine plural. So in, as in cherubim. And then we have vav and tav, pronounced ot, as in sukkot, which would be the feminine plural sukkah. And then we have ha and tav, which in the middle of a word is a clue for heat. I don't know why, that just seems to be a rule. Then we have the double vav in the middle of a word, typically sounds like vu. And then we have ayin and lamed, and it's usually al, which means two. It's the indirect object marker. And then we have aleph and lamed, and that is usually pronounced el. So, for example, we have Elohim, Eliyahu, Yoel. Now we have Hebrew pangram number 1. A pangram is a sentence in which every single letter of a language is used. So you'll see here, every single letter in the Hebrew alphabet is used, and these are actual words. If you'd like to practice your decoding skills without the Nikkud, pause the video, and then unpause when you're ready. So then, now that you've unpaused, let's try it with the Nikkud. Take a look at that, and pause to practice, and then unpause when you're ready. Now that you've unpaused, let's see if you were able to pronounce it this way. Shefan achal chatzat gazar beta'am chasa vedi. And you'll notice that I colored these words so that you can see where in the sentence exactly they will go. And it appears the word order is fairly similar. I guess I didn't put the space in there, unfortunately. You'll see the red are usually prepositions, be, meaning in, and be, meaning ant. And I'll explain what this sentence means. A rabbit ate some carrot in the flavor of lettuce, and enough. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You'll notice that they don't have words for a, they're not using the word the, and they don't really have a word for It is implied by having this noun followed by another noun. The second noun would be of lettuce. Here's what it means thought for thought. A rabbit ate some lettuce flavored carrot, and that's it. So now we have pangram number 2, and here's the sentence without Nikkud. Pause to practice, and then unpause to practice with the Nikkud. Now that you've unpaused, let's try with the Nikkud. So pause to practice, and then unpause to see how you did. Now that you've unpaused, here's what it sounds like. Dag, sikran, shat, bayem, me'ukzav, ulfeta, matza, chavra. This is one of the examples where if you have a letter vav and a lamed is u instead of the le. Let's see what this means. A curious fish sailed the sea, disappointedly and suddenly found company. It does kind of remind me of the book of Jonah with the fish and all that. If you know anything about Samson and his story, his enemy was the Philistines, and they worshipped a fish god named Dagon. The language of the Philistines was very similar to Hebrew. Company is very similar to the word for friend, haver, so multiple friends would be company. And they have a tradition where they hide matzah and it needs to be found, so bayem. This is similar to Yam, as in Yam Suf, Red Sea. We also see the word Yam in Miriam, which translates into English as Miriam or Mariam, or even Mary. And then we have pangram number 3. So pause to practice, and then unpause when you're ready. Now that you've unpaused, let's see how you do with the Nikkud. Pause to practice, and then unpause to see how you did. Now that you've unpaused, let's see how you did. Here's how it's pronounced. Hoch hitrasek nampetz al gozel katan shedachaf et tzevi lamayim. So we have quite a few different words and sounds that we should be able to understand. So remember, when we have an ayin and a lamed, as opposed to an aleph and a lamed, this is going to be pronounced al. And this is one of the examples of kaf and chaf, Sofit. This is going to be a k sound, and this is going to be a ch sound. We have an example of the heat sound, where we have the he and the tav, she, which means that or which to begin a word. We also have this word I haven't taught quite yet, et, and it's a marker for a direct object. So, and then we have tzevi. This e here means my. And then we have the lamed. So if you remember lamed, your best guess is that it means to. So how did we do with the meaning? We don't know all the words, but koch means so, and in modern Hebrew there's a phrase kocha kocha, which means so. Okay. And then we have hitrasek, we have the verb first, crashed, and then the next word is a noun, explosive. We don't have an. They don't really use indefinite articles in Hebrew. And then al, which means, in this case, into, sort of marking an indirect object, which is the small chet. You notice the indirect object noun comes before the adjective, much like Spanish or French or Italian. And yes, this means which, pushed. And do we see the word et? Yes, we do. The dir is the direct object, and then la means into the water, mayin. And you will notice la and al have very similar meanings, and that lamed can be a very great hint. Just knowing the letters can really help your understand it. Now we have Hebrew Pangram number 4, and take a look at the sentence without Nikkud. Pause to practice, and then unpause when you're ready. Now that you've unpaused, let's try it with Nikkud. Pause to practice, and then unpause when you're ready. Now that you've unpaused, let's see how you did. Atalef, avok, mus, darach, miskan, shehit, otzetz, ki, cham. Ayin is going to have an a sound most of the time. A Nikkud generator uses a vav with the dot there. It helps derive the meaning. And then we have darach, which ends with a chaf Sofit. So if you pronounce that k, it's ch. And then mizgan, she, there's that word, that, or which. She, heat. Remember, he and tav have a heat pronunciation. Strangely, this has a p sound. So it's one of the rare cases. Sets. Remember, this is 2 of these sadis in a row. Then we have ki. And note that this is a kaf in the beginning of the word, so it's going to have the dagesh. And then we have cham. Most of the time, the ch has an a sound, so cham. And what does this mean in English? A dust bat fled by way of the air conditioner, which exploded because of the heat. Very strange sentence, but it is a pangram, so they don't really need to make sense. So, thank you for joining me on this Hebrew journey. Toda raba, and lehitrayot. See you later.